Let's now take ourselves, as I like to say, across the Chattahoochee River. This doesn't necessarily geographically totally make sense, but it is the line of demarcation in my mind between the SEC East and the SEC West. Biggest takeaways to this point in the season in the SEC West: Alabama is going to have to play a different kind of defense this year. As Colin shows you the standings there, Crimson Tide 4-0, clearly in the driver's seat. They've already got a game. Well, they already beat Texas A&M, so they got kind of like a game and a half lead there. And then it's a bunch of, Auburn is really 1-3, and Arkansas is really 3-1, even though Colin went by the book. He had to put what their records actually are. I'm telling you what they should be. And I don't ever say that, but this is literally one of those should-be cases. And then you got LSU, Mississippi State, Ole Miss. So let's talk about these. Alabama is going to have to be opportunistic on defense if they want to win a national championship. I think we've learned that by now. Elite is probably not in the cards for this defense this year. But I'll tell you what is in the cards. The way they played the other night is their formula to win a national championship. It's going to involve swallowing some pride. For fans, it's going to involve getting comfortable or at least accepting a lot of what has been unacceptable to you in the past. You know what you have. Now, what we have there and what worked Saturday night against Georgia is obviously one of the most prolific offenses to this point in the season the sport has ever seen. So you know you can score at will virtually on people, even the best defense in America, in my opinion. So you know you have that. And you know you have the ability to force the issue defensively. You may not be elite. You may not even be very good defensively, but what you can be is opportunistic by the sheer factor that you have so many athletes on the field. I want to take you back. You Alabama fans will remember this vividly and painfully. A couple of years ago, I remember being out in California. We were in Santa Clara, national championship game, Alabama versus Clemson. And I remember Alabama was moving the ball on Clemson very early on. And I thought to myself, man, I think they're going to run away with this game. That's the game Clemson blew Alabama out in. How could you be so wrong early in the game? How could you feel such a way about a team early in the game and then them end up getting blown out? What happened was Clemson and Brent Venables played the kind of defense that night that Alabama's going to need to play this year to win a championship. They didn't worry about shutting you down. They didn't think they could. And they were right. They couldn't. But what they did was they forced turnovers. And that's what worked the other night against Georgia. Bama didn't shut Georgia down offensively, far from it. But what they did is they were able to force turnovers. And when you got an offense like they have, you don't have to force many of them. You just got to steal a couple of possessions. They can't punt the ball over 25 yards. Apparently they can kick field goals now. They can't kick the ball out of the end zone to save their life. But what they can do is they can force some turnovers. That's going to be the formula this year for them to win a national championship. As for the team that won the championship last year and is far from that lofty goal this year is the LSU Tigers. I said in the beginning of the year, now I will now reiterate it, I think LSU is going to learn a whole lot more from 2020 than they learned from 2019. No one really learns a ton of valuable lessons when everything goes right. That's true in life. That's true in football too. So what lessons do you think could be learned here? Because I came up with a few. I think right now some tough lessons are being learned down there about how many attitudes need to change. What was the collective attitude going into the offseason? You had a lot of folks around there that had been either part of a championship team or been part of a championship organization, depending on what your role was. How did attitudes around there change? Did complacency set in? Also, how did you vet new hires? What was your criteria? What was your standard for going about new hires? You know, famously, Ed Orgeron was very vocal about the fact that he thought they were going to be better defensively this year than they were last year. Well, of course, they're not. And so who is that a reflection on? Is it a Bo Pelini thing? Bo Pelini didn't hire himself. And so, maybe we get to the season's end and there are some moves made to rectify some flaws that maybe Ed Orgeron has seen in his own approach and how he went about things this offseason. Listen, they had so much going on behind the scenes. Some of it you know about, some of it you don't know about, some of it was obvious. So, it's talk about an unprecedented year. In the middle of an unprecedented year, LSU was dealing with what would even in a normal year be unprecedented circumstances. How they handle this year and then how they react to it, that's ultimately going to determine the next 5-year stretch for LSU football. A whole lot more than winning a championship in historic fashion in 2019 would. Now, I'm talking Tigers here, but I'm going to Auburn. There is a fear. If you watch SEC football a lot, there's this fear people always have about Auburn. It's the rabbit out of the hat fear. And what it is trying to figure out Auburn is like trying to nail Jell-O to a wall. And when you think you haven't figured out, that's when the jello falls to the ground and they totally reinvent themselves mid-season and they pull a rabbit out of a hat and they end up like beating Alabama in the Iron Bowl and extending Malzahn another 7 years for $100 billion. That's the kind of stuff Auburn pulls on the regular. Well, here's what my takeaway is from them right now. There is no rabbit, as far as I can tell, in the 2020 hat for Auburn. The offense has lacked any kind of discernible identity. Quarterback play, to me, has regressed there, and that's very disappointing because I had pretty moderate to high hopes for Bo Nix this year. Defense, not only did they lose the likes of Brown and Marlon Davidson, but they also, this season, have lost K.J. Britt, who was every bit as valuable to their defense as, for example, Dylan Moses was to Alabama last year. That's the quarterback of your defense. I want you to think about this. I had a coach tell me this yesterday or today. I can't remember. Days are all running together now. I got home at like 5 o'clock this morning. Had to drive from Columbus. So the coach told me, independent of what day it was, he said, let me ask you something. When's the last time that you looked at Auburn's defense and you said to yourself, well, I'll tell you, the way to attack them is just straight up the middle? And I said, I don't remember saying that, man. Not since Kevin Steele's been there. But it's kind of true right now. Kentucky did it. Georgia did it. That's how South Carolina went about it. Now, Carolina didn't hang 700 yards on them, but they did enough to continue to paper cut them to death. And Georgia certainly got a surge all night long, and Kentucky had a lot of success against them. So the point is, they are void of what their normal identity is on offense and defense. And Tank Bigsby right now, Tank Bigsby is one of the few bright spots offensively for them, but that's the point. I mean, Tank Bigsby was one of maybe 3 or 4 names that you thought you'd be counting on there. Tank Bigsby is carrying the water for them right now. That's a true freshman out of Callaway High School. I was standing on sidelines in a high school stadium this time last year watching Bigsby run, with Malzahn standing next to me on the sideline, by the way. I just remembered that. So my point is, the game plan right now is to just attack Auburn up the middle because they're not what they normally are, right up the middle, right up the heart of their defense. And if you're facing them defensively, well, just wait, man. They'll turn it over. That's essentially what Muschamp in South Carolina did the other day. Just wait. They'll turn it over. And you wait, and they turn it over. You build a spider web, they walk right into it. At Texas A&M, though, things are much different. I'm going to say something here, and I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to pull the graphic up. Okay, so I'm going to say something here. I don't want you to freak out. It's not a prediction, but I am going to say that my biggest takeaway for A&M right now is they are a college football playoff contender. Okay, that much I really think I know. Now, it's not a prediction they're going to make it there, but I think we have to acknowledge something. I think we have to acknowledge their loss to Alabama. Now that we frame it within the context of what Alabama also did against Georgia, I don't think it looks nearly like the end of the world it looked like when it happened. And you combine that with the fact that all A&M did was go right back home, get up off the deck, and beat Florida in mild upset fashion, and then took care of Mississippi State in a game that didn't impress many of you, but I was impressed because they did what they're supposed to do. That's a spot that has cut the legs out from under many a team. You're coming off a big-time program-defining win. You go on the road, you're less than a touchdown favorite, and you end up handling them for most of the afternoon. That was A&M did what Tennessee wasn't able to do last week. Very similar point spread situations, radically different outcomes. Well, the point is, so now A&M, as I said, they're going to go quiet for a while. They got a bye week right now. I'm going to read you the rest of their schedule unless something changes. They've got Arkansas at home on the 31st, which is not an easy game anymore. Then they got back-to-back roadies at Carolina, at Tennessee. Then they got back-to-back home games against Ole Miss and LSU, and then they'll finish the season at Auburn. Guys, they're favored in every one of those games. Doesn't mean they're going to win them, but I'm telling you right now, as we sit here today, Texas A&M will be favored in every one of those games. And so, what if they're sitting there slowly finding their identity? They've lost a lot of talent at wide receiver from all sorts of different issues this year, so they're not going to necessarily be able to bomb away on folks. They have the threat of mobility at quarterback. Isaiah Spiller has really come on at running back for them. They understand, I think, in watching them this year, they understand what they are and what they aren't offensively. They have improved defensively. They're really good on the lines of scrimmage. Okay, they can disrupt with the guys they got up front defensively. They got a more than serviceable offensive line. They got a really good offensive line, actually. So the remaining question for me outside of will they be favored in every game is if they are, and they start to rattle off some wins, I can't remember under Fisher where this team has ever had to show how they handle late season expectation. They've had it early in the year, Like, they've graced the cover of many a preview magazine, and that was even before Fisher got there. But they haven't ever gotten into the deeper waters of November and late November this year. I mean, what if they're carrying a number 6 ranking when they play LSU the second to last week of the year? And LSU is looking at that game as their Super Bowl because they're already out of it. And Auburn, ditto, to end the regular season. Who knows how that goes? That's one I don't think anyone can answer. I don't even think Aggie fans have the slightest clue how their program would handle late season playoff talk. But I'm sure you want to find out. I do want to hit on Arkansas here because they deserve to be hit on. I told you I am observing them as a 3-1 team right now. Sam Pittman is 2020's Ed Orgeron. The only difference between the two is he has a lot less raw talent on his roster, so he is not capable, and that team's not capable of, rattling off a run to a national championship. But make no mistake, this is the guy that has surpassed everyone's wildest expectations this year. This is a guy who is coaching a team that was so vastly inferior against virtually every team they would have played last year in this conference outside of Vanderbilt. I don't even know that they played Vandy last year, but outside of that matchup, they were viewed as so inferior. I had someone tell me this was the 13th roster in the SEC, and there wasn't necessarily an extremely wide gap between them and Vanderbilt. I didn't believe that last part. But I did believe that it's reasonable that that's the 13th best roster in the SEC this year. And look at what they're doing right now. The hiring of that coordinator combo of Kendall Briles and Barry Odom, phenomenal. Very opportunistic and phenomenal. And let me give you another little FYI. They're going to be able to recruit. Pittman's a phenomenal recruiter anyway, but I want you to think about kids out there who are fringe guys. Maybe they don't have the committable offers from Alabama or LSU or Georgia. Maybe they don't have those. But what they're watching is maybe they grow up watching SEC football. So, a lot of kids want to play in the SEC. And maybe you got some of those East Texas kids, or maybe you got some of those Florida kids, and they're by the hundreds down there. And maybe they're watching Arkansas, and they're saying, well, I want to play SEC ball. I want to be competitive, and I got a certain wiring about me. And that program up there in Arkansas really kind of reflects the way that I view myself. The kind of kid, you mark my words, the kind of kid that Arkansas is going to be able to get, the kind of kids they're going to be in it for, are the kind of kids that you want to build your roster and build a foundation on to begin with. Like, those by default are the kinds of kids that you're going to be able to win with. So they're going to be able to recruit up there. I think Arkansas is going to end up making a little more noise than you expect them to in recruiting. But, hey, I got to find out what they're going to do the rest of the season first, because as much as I looked at A&M's schedule there, I'm looking at Arkansas. And they got A&M coming up, and they got Tennessee, and they play Florida, and they play LSU, and they play Alabama. So they tossed you in the wood chipper before the season started. Then they tossed you in the wood chipper while you played Auburn. And yet we applaud you anyway here. We will wave the Razorback flag along with you.